lack of incentives. So I'm actually concluding my master's in biodiversity conservation this month. And my school, told us, they were like, oh, we need to come up with a policy brief because we have realized that there's too much volunteerism happening, especially in the biodiversity and conservation sector. And one of the doctors said, so we are going to look for young people who would want to volunteer to collect data. I was the first one to raise my hand, and I was like, you want to come up with a policy brief to address volunteerism in the conservation space, and you want young people to volunteer? I think already we are missing the point. So this is where I'm coming from. There are lack of incentives. Young people, they do have the energy. They do want to support. They do have that energy, right? And I'm not only talking about young people. I'm also talking about even young women as well, because in this space, we do have a lot of males that are quite dominant. So there is that need to make sure that we provide incentives for young people. There is need for us to provide incentives for any stakeholder that is interested to support into the conservation of biodiversity and also climate change. Then the other issue that I wanted to look into or to talk about is issues to do with inclusivity. We need to make sure that we come up with a whole government approach and a whole society approach. So when we are now coming up with our policies, what we need to look at is, do we have representation from the indigenous communities? Do we have young people's, those that are representing young people, those that are representing, the females, those that are representing different committees, etc. and stuff? That is quite important. If we do that, we have diversity. And if there is diversity, that policy can be adopted better. And it's not only about adoption, but it's also about, making it easy for it to be implemented, especially within communities. Then, just to round up, I think I also want to focus on issues to do with a lack of finance within the space. Just trying to do a research on climate change and biodiversity, it's just so difficult without the money. Yes, we'll always talk about money. It's always about money and will not stop. So it has to go there. You need to understand that it is very important that in this space we need to collect as much data as we can, because without the data, it's difficult to come up with possible biodiversity action plans that are quite implementable. But it can never be possible if there is no money to support with research to make sure that data is available. So I think this is what I'll say.
Super, thank you very much for that. Very, very helpful answer. So now my question is for Faith. I'm going to leapfrog. Faith, what financing opportunities does an integrated nature and climate action approach, so bringing together both nature and climate, what opportunities do you think are presented for Africa, and what, from the private sector perspective, what sort of funding do you think would be possible? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa. And I'd start by this quote from the We Forum that says, financial performance in a dead planet is irrelevant. And that basically means that even if you do business and do it very well and get all the returns, if nature is not there at the center of business, then all that money has no value. And that means that from a business perspective, from how I have seen this space evolve from the time I got myself actively engaged in business and environment, businesses used to do business of the environment as a CSR, corporate social responsibility. And I know even today there are people who come and say, you will do it as a CSR. I tell them, no, we are no longer doing this as a CSR. I actually feel violated when you tell me we are going to do it as CSR. Because CSR is what you do after we've done all the important things. It's like charity. And when the youth representative says voluntary, that's exactly the spirit. So there is opportunity to change that mindset so that from the word go, when business models are being defined or being designed, they have nature in mind. So the opportunities that I see, I classify them into 4. They are proactive opportunities, they are preventive opportunities, they are restorative opportunities, and they are enabling opportunities. I will try to say what that basically means. Proactive opportunities are really businesses that are designed to solve nature problems by design. I look at that like bio-based enterprises, the enterprises that actually like are doing water recycling. They are doing that for nature, but there's business behind it. And therefore that business then makes sense. There is agroforestry. You're doing agriculture, but then you incorporate it with a forestry dimension. Then it means naturally, then you're addressing environmental or nature issues. When it comes to preventive, it is very important that business practices reduce pollution and emissions into nature. And that cannot come as an afterthought. So we've seen a movement, or we are seeing businesses, especially within the Kenya, adopting extended producer responsibility as a way of being responsible for your emissions, being responsible of the materials that are forming the product, so that by the time the material gets to the consumer's hands, they will not be discarded to the environment at post-consumer level. And therefore it's important that businesses are able to design products that are not going to be harmful to the environment, both by material and also by reducing the toxins in there. When it comes to restoration, I'll take the example of the Hala Park in Kenya that has existed for over 50 years. A very beautiful park down in Mombasa, restored. You'll see the wonderful animals in there. But over years, visitors are visiting, visitors are paying park fees, and then it becomes just a natural business. The enabling opportunities are on the financial side, ability to be able to provide finances to nature-based solutions. So we are seeing commercial forestry growing up. And that means that it's important that that kind of business is actually financed. But of course, when it comes to the financing, the models are as varied and as disintegrated as they are at the moment in terms of how we are looking at business. And I'm looking at the movement around ESG reporting. I'm moving at the movement around life cycle assessment as a way that will help to be able to really put tangible value into the value of business, into the value of nature into business for holistic accounting and to be able to provide for nature-based financing. So right now it's a bit very low based on the principle that I said before. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane.
Thank you, Faith. And I think I want to move now to Jane because you started, and I'm sure Jane is going to be able to build on that. Jane, from your experience, and of course, build on what Faith was just saying, how can business, and with clear example, capitalize on nature to climate-proof their business and mainly to ensure sustainability? I like the quote that Faith said, so I want to connect that quote with your answer.
No, fantastic. I'm a member of our organization, so I can only affirm of what she's saying. But thank you very much. So I just want to take just a second, just explaining who is EABL and how we've structured ourselves to answer to your question. So we are East African breweries. We are in the alcoholic beverages industry. We are totally connected in the value chains across East Africa in 7 countries. And what we do, we buy grain and convert it to lovely brands where people can enjoy. We then come and described ourselves. That was for him. That's where we started. But then on a serious note, even in that business, we've come to define what our purpose is. Because I think the new businesses have to define their purpose because we want to celebrate the next N years. We've just celebrated 100 years in Kenya. We've been here since 1922, and we are still thriving. So the question for us is, how do we thrive? And not through volunteerism, to the next 100 years and beyond. So our purpose, clearly defined, is to celebrate life every day, everywhere, for all the stakeholders, from grain to glass. That includes, if you think about grain, it's from a farmer, from the earth, up to him in the evening, who's probably going to enjoy a Tusker. So we are taking care of, and that includes even the government, who's going to get taxed, so they can do all the things that governments need to do. It's to do with any of our suppliers, it's for farmers, so that we can ensure we have shared prosperity across that integrated value chain. And therefore, to keep us honest on that, we have called out a performance ambition. Of course, a performance ambition has to have performance. What are you doing in terms of profitability and market share, etc.? But also we've called out, what are you doing about other things on brands? Are you having safety brands for sustainability? And are these brands not doing bad stuff to the earth? I go back to the language of earth and nature. We've then gone back and defined it even in terms of our supply chain. Where are we sourcing? If we are growing grain, are we thinking about regenerative agriculture? So we do a lot of research with research institutions across the patch to make sure that we are getting good growing seeds, like I get told, that are easier to grow to protect the environment. And we're also researching on regenerative agriculture and how we can get more biodiverse. I'm trying to get back to your words. And then we're also doing a lot in terms of our transport. Let me go to manufacturing first. So over the last 5 or 6 years, we've really invested in making our manufacturing green. So we've invested a lot of money, I think in the last 3 years, $35 million on building biomass plants, where we have stopped using HFO in our plants. You know, if you operate in Kenya and East Africa, we're already nearer the green energy levels. It's ahead of 92% green energy usage. We also have solar. But what was giving us a challenge was HFO usage to power our boilers. They are now on green biomass materials, and we are creating other value chains with farmers to again drive the shared prosperity, to get whether it's a macadamia house, a sugar bagasse, and many others that will get into the future. For water, we're very big on water, and we have 3 words. We have reuse, recycle, and replenishment. So we've invested a lot of money in recycling the water. In fact, from a standards perspective, the Tusker Brewery is probably top of the world in terms of liters of water per a bottle of beer. So we want to be the best in class. I think it's only one company, I won't mention them because they are competitors who are beating us on this, but we are working very hard. And in fact, if you come to our plant, you can see state-of-the-art, very expensive recent technology on recycling and reuse. I think the other one is on carbon emissions. We are determined to reduce our carbon emissions. I think in the last, shall I say 2 years or so, we've reduced by 55% carbon emissions just last year actually. These are years statistics between 2022 and 2021, we've reduced carbon emissions by 55%. So we are very, very determined. And the reason we are doing that is because we believe if we don't do that, to her point, there'll be nobody to enjoy our brands. There'll be nobody to share the prosperity with. But more importantly, we are determined to be a good corporate citizen because we are investing behind even capability. All the leadership has gone through Oxford University training on sustainability. I can tell you it was a very interesting course, very difficult. I learned a lot of things, but it's mandatory. Some of the long incentive plans for the organization is also based on sustainability. So you're not doing this just for the profit as we knew it before. You're also doing it for how well you're doing across that chain I've described, which is grain to glass, that has elements of sustainable diversity and inclusion, responsible drinking. And then I think more importantly is we've publicly declared what our 2030 ambitions are. We call it Society 2030. Or if I'm reporting in Financial Times, we call it ESG. But really, Society 2030 is our interpretation of environmental, social, and governance targets within our business, and we have 2030. So for example, some of them are very audacious. Some of them we are ahead. We are ahead on the carbon. We are very good on the water. But we said by 2030, I'm trying to get the targets, sorry, running all over, but we said we want to be by 2030 to be carbon net zero. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I might in fact change my beer brand as a direct result of what you said. So thank you. So the last question is for Aruna from the AFDB. Thank you for joining us. So despite the recent attention on climate change action and the increased attention which would hopefully bring funds, we find that investments in ecosystem and nature solutions, so nature-based solutions, still remain relatively small. What is needed to enable more public and private financial flows to ecosystem-based approaches and nature-based solutions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. Let me just maybe start by a story. Although I'm not working for the African Bank and I have worked with other MDBs, I'm from a conservation background. And in my previous life, I was tasked to set up the first MPAs in West Africa. There was no MPA on the ground. And our initial task was just to go and see the Prime Minister of Senegal and get some political backing from him. That, we'd like to set up some new MPAs and blah, blah. And the answer was, okay, we don't want you to fence the sea. You guys are putting fences everywhere in a situation where sometimes people are hardly surviving. I don't want to see that anymore. That was the initial answer. So we had to make the case, and I said, listen, I'm not talking about fencing the sea. I'm talking about protecting assets which provide 600,000 jobs. I'm talking about people who sometimes the long term is tonight. Will my husband come back from fishing with at least a couple of fish? One for the meal, another one which can be sold so I can keep my kids at school. So the whole narrative has changed, and we get the strongest political backing we can get ever. And a few years later, we were able to put on the ground around 10 MPAs in West Africa. What does it mean? It means that, we need to change the narrative and break the silos. If you're fishers in Senegal or if you're a farmer in the Sahel, you don't know what is an NBSAP. You don't know what is an LDN. You don't know what is an NDC. What matters for you is, one, how to protect your assets and how to use it sustainably. And this is where, the bank is coming from, because, as an enabler for development, we have really to make sure that in doing business, we also take